Plato draws a distinction that is surprisingly relevant today. He basically says that not everything that can persuade us gives us knowledge. There are some forms of persuasion that produce belief and belief alone, and other forms of persuasion lead us toward understanding. And the challenge for us is to learn to tell the difference. And we live today in an age overflowing with persuasion. We have experts, we have this, we have that, but we have abundant information, but we are starving for knowledge. Our era is so on the surface, so shallow. Someone can be persuaded by appearances, opinions, and rhetoric, and other people require understanding. And the crisis of our age is that we have totally confused the two. Now I'm gonna read a little passage from Plato's Gorgias. It is very short, but it is like a slap. Okay, here we go. I translated it. Okay, so, is there such a thing as learning? And is there such a thing as believing? Are learning and believing the same thing? Can someone believe something that is true and also believe something that is false? This is Socrates talking. Then there is true belief and false belief. But is there such a thing as true knowledge and false knowledge? If not, then knowledge differs from belief. Yet both those who know and those who believe have been persuaded. Therefore, there are two kinds of persuasion. One that produces belief without knowledge, and another one that produces belief through knowledge. We have already spoken about Plato's divided line again and again. Imagination, eikasia, belief, pistis, reasoning, diania, and total understanding, noesis. Now, many times these are presented as someone, for example, abandons the lower eikasia and moves mechanically to the higher. But the whole thing is more complicated. It's a spiral. Imagination has its proper function when it is used correctly. Imagination, eikasia is, eikazo is I imagine, I assume. Belief has its proper function when it is grounded properly. And reasoning, in the same way, can be grounded properly. So the problem is not that they exist and we use them, and we use them wrongly, of course. It is their misuse. When imagination, belief, and reasoning are cultivated in the right way and ordered correctly, they gradually become the very pathways towards noesis, the direct understanding. So the ascent is not at all a rejection of the lower faculties. It is the harmonization of them and the proper orientation towards the truth. I was reading a bit of Carl Jung's lectures on Nietzsche's psychological development. I found it by luck a couple of months ago online. Jung describes a man who was brilliant, but also a man that was increasingly isolated within his own intellectual world. And at times Nietzsche could be even ironic towards his students. And Jung mentions occasions when Nietzsche would totally lose patience with questions he considered self-evident. Now, what made me thinking was not the actual story itself, but it kind of reveals a deeper philosophical issue, a different philosophical problem. And one day I would like to write an entire book on this, combining Jung's observations with one work of antiquity that it is not known at all, the tablet of Kevis. Kevis was a student of Socrates, and so it is associated with the Socratic tradition. Now, it presents human life as a journey through successive circles of existence, like gardens. People enter the gardens, and as they enter, they are trapped. They are trapped by opinion, by illusion, by luck, by false learning, and what the text calls pseudo-pedia, which means pseudo-education, believing themselves that they are wise, that they are there, while remaining far from genuine understanding. So, this raises a question. Did Nietzsche, despite his immense genius, become lost in that very garden of pseudo-pedia, of pseudo-education? And now, if you say this to a Nietzsche fan, they will slap you. It will sound almost absurd. Because, after all, Nietzsche loved the Greek classics. He was a professor of classical philology and one of the most penetrating readers of antiquity in modern history. But here's the thing. Possessing knowledge of texts and of the language is not necessarily the same thing as participating in the spirit, in the same spirit. And it was his era too. Maybe he would have been different today. And reading a bit of those lectures left me with another impression. It is not enough intellectual brilliance. A person may read thousands of books, master entire traditions of whatever, and still remain imprisoned within the structures of his own psyche. The most decisive step is self-observation. Only through self-observation we can begin to notice that what disturbs us most in others ever so often reveals something that is hidden within ourselves. And we begin to recognize projection, and we discover that many of our judgments are actually reflections of forces that are operating unconsciously within us, our Hades. And until that moment, we remain trapped inside mirrors without realizing that we are actually looking at ourselves here. And this is the Dionysus Katoptron, the Dionysus mirror. The myth has a mirror. So, knowledge alone can never be sufficient. You need to pass through self-observation. And self-observation, it is what leads us to self-knowledge. It's exactly what I was doing when I was a musician. When I was a musician, I was actually practicing self-observation without even realizing what I was doing. Later on in my life, I read by Plotinus that when a musician realizes what he's doing, what he's trying to achieve with music, he switches and he becomes a philosopher. That's why Know thyself was written in the middle of the temple of Apollo at Delphi. It was right in the middle. And of course, it is not that knowledge of the world is unimportant. Of course it is important. For a Greek philosopher, the knowledge of the world is absolutely everything. But knowledge of oneself is the very condition that allows all other knowledge to find its proper place. Otherwise, you have the illusion of knowledge. So this is where I find myself questioning Nietzsche. It is not his intelligence. He had a lot of courage. He was a genius. But I don't think he fully crossed that threshold. I mean, if he actually moved beyond the intellectual analysis into the deeper work of observing the observer, if he recognized all the forces that were acting within himself before declaring war on the forces he saw in the world. He was right about it. But there was something going on there. And now the other thing is that when we examine Nietzsche's distinction between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, it makes a super distinction there. It is brilliant. But is it complete? Where is Athena? Where is Ares? Where is Esthea? Hephaestus, Hermes, Demetra? Where is the rest of the Greek pantheon? The Greek worldview was never a simple dualism. It was not built upon two opposing principles. It was a living system of interconnected forces and functions. It was a symbolic map of reality itself, a reality of motion, either cosmic motion or individual motion. As a person, how do I move within the world? Literally moving mentally and physically together. The gods were never just characters in stories. They are principles, powers, relationships, and dimensions of existence. And I don't know why Nietzsche could not see it. But then I understand this other thing, because I went through this. I couldn't see things that were right in front of my nose for a very long time. For example, the Greek birthday song goes like, at some point, the lyrics are always and everywhere spread the light of knowledge so that everyone can turn, look at you and say, here is a wise man. It's like we wish to one another to become a philosopher. It's so weird. We sing this to each other since the early childhood. Yet, to understand the depth of this, it took me 27 years of my life, when at some point my wife is Austrian, and we live half the year in Austria and half the year in Greece. At the moment we're in Greece. Turned around and told me, what the hell are you singing to each other? This is the craziest birthday song I've heard in my life. And I was like, huh? Wow, I never thought about it. And this is just an example. We don't see things that are right in front of our nose. It's amazing. So the Greek cosmos is a system. And I could even say it is mathematical, it is musical. It is a symphony. And a symphony is not composed of two notes. And neither is the human soul, of course. We have wisdom, courage, creativity, harmony. We communicate, discipline, inspiration, transformation, arguments. All of these things belong to the greater whole. So the entire orchestra is required. And sometimes I wonder whether Nietzsche, in his attempt to restore Dionysus against Apollo, heard two instruments of the symphony while losing sight of the music in the end. So, going back to pseudo-education, it is not ignorance, it is the illusion that information is transformation. And this is what we have been suffering from in our age. It is the belief that accumulating knowledge automatically produces wisdom. No, it can lead to distraction, and we see it. Wisdom begins somewhere else. It begins at the moment we stop looking only at our ideas and we begin looking at ourselves.